Hi everyone, it's Kelly here. Welcome to my channel if this is your first time. Welcome back if you've been before. Lovely to have you either way. On this channel we talk books, and today I am wrapping up my reading for the month of September. In this month, was participating in Straya September, that's hosted by Scott at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. I will link to his channel down in the description below, and I'll also link up in the cards to the video where I gave you my TBR for September. I don't often do TBRs because I'm not very good at keeping to them, but I actually did a really good job this time and I managed to complete all of the prompts for Straya September. So and actually a couple of times over, because in total I read 6 books and there are only 4 prompts, and all of the books that I read this month were by Australian authors, so I'm pretty pleased about that. There was one book that was on my TBR that I didn't finish, and that was this one, The Yield by June Winch. I started listening to this as an audiobook and the audiobook was just not working for me at all, and just where my head was at, I wasn't in the headspace to be reading this with my eyeballs. So I will come back to this and I will at some point reread what I listened to and then continue. But for some reason, just the narrator of the audiobook just didn't seem right to me, like it was not quite the right narrator. I'm not sure. Yeah, so I will come back to this at some point, but I didn't complete it. I did get a little way through, but yeah, I'm going to restart that and look at it at another time when my eyeball reading is going to work for me a bit better. All right, let's have a look at the books that I did finish reading though in the month of September. The first book that I finished this month was Mullumbimby by Melissa Lucashenko. This is the second Melissa Lucashenko book that I've read. So I've read Too Much Lip. I've read it a couple of times and really enjoyed it. So I had a really good feeling about this book, and that was definitely warranted. So in this book, we've got we follow our main character Jo, who buys a farm, and it's in the Byron Bay hinterland, which is part of her the ancestral land of her people. So she's buying a property on her ancestral lands. In the story, she meets another character called Two Boy, who is fighting a native title claim for land in, as he is also descended from the peoples of that land. So it's sort of exploring the differences and different ways that people approach kind of the same goal, and there is some conflict around that, and some real sort of like reflective work that happens in this book. I really, really enjoyed it. There was a really strong sense of place, a strong sense of country, the effects of politics and different approaches that people take to living on the land and living on the lands of their people, and also what it means to be Aboriginal today, and in a sort of really nuanced way. So I really loved it. I gave it 4 stars. Another fantastic book by Melissa Lucashenko. She's so good at banter. The conversations between the characters and the way that they talk to one another is just really evocative of character, and I think she does a really fantastic job with that. So yeah, highly recommend. This was really, really good. The second book that I read in the month of September was one that I sort of picked up on a whim, but is also one that when I bought it, I definitely picked up on a whim. It was a cover buy for 100% sure. But also then when I looked at what the synopsis of the book was, I was like, yeah, this is definitely a book for me, because it's about the art world, specifically the art world in Sydney, which is where I live, and I have had hyperfixations on Australian art, specifically Sydney-produced Australian art, at different points in my life. Behind me on this shelf here is a lot of the art books that I've collected. There's a whole shelf of Australian art books. So this is definitely an area of interest for me, and also, what I didn't realise is that Kylie Needham, the author of this book, Girl in the Pink Dress, is married to Ben Quilty, who is a very well-known Australian artist based in New South Wales, I believe they live in the Southern Highlands. So she has a very in-depth knowledge of the Australian art scene, the Sydney art scene specifically. So in this book, our main character is Frances, and she's a painter living in a remote mountain town in New South Wales. And then through recollections, we learn about her past relationship with Clem Hughes, who is the son of a celebrated Australian artist called Albert Hughes, but he's also an artist in his own right. But he's kind of struggling, I guess, with his identity too, because he's the son of a famous artist. So his story is part of Albert's story, and it's hard for people to kind of disconnect him. So he's sort of like riding on the coattails of his father, but he's also trying to like establish himself as himself. And then of course, Frances is also really, you know, establishing herself as an artist, but also has this kind of like connection to Clem Hughes. So she's sort of known for that as well as for her art. So it's kind of this real complicated story, I guess, and very, very reflective. I really loved this. This was amazing. I've written stunning in my notes. Stunning, stunning literary novel. Very character driven, very reflective. One thing I will say, I loved this. I gave it 4.5 stars. It was amazing. The reason I took half a star off is because the life-changing event that's alluded to in the blurb. So they mention in the blurb on this book that there's a big life-changing event that happens. When it happens, I kind of forgot about it because it happens so late in the book. And then when it happens, I felt that it was a wee bit over the top for the character. It didn't quite work for me in terms of what seemed like a logical place for her to go as a character. So in my opinion, it kind of felt like it came out of the blue a little bit. Otherwise, this was absolutely beautifully done and I loved it. I will very much be looking up future books written by this author because it was brilliant. Also, the audiobook narrator, because I listened to this on audiobook while at the same time reading it with my eyes. The audiobook narrator is Airlie Dodds, who's an actress, and she did a fantastic job of narrating this to the point where I looked up any other audiobooks that she has done, and there's one, and I immediately, and it also sounded like an interesting book, so I immediately have reserved it on the library, so I'm crossing my fingers. And then when I do my book haul, you will see I bought the book that she has narrated. So specifically because of the narrator, I have bought a book. So yeah, it was fantastic. Really highly recommend the audiobook for this one, but even just the book itself, amazing. Loved it. Okay, the next book that I read was a poetry collection, and it is These Wild Houses by Omar Sakr. So he's a poet from Western Sydney. He's queer, he's Muslim, he's an Arab Australian, and this collection really encapsulates, I think, the experience of coming to terms with all of those identities and trying to live authentically in all of those identities that at some times feel like they're in conflict with one another. So yeah, I really enjoyed this poetry collection. There were some very strong poems in here. So particularly, let me have a quick look at my tabs. If you're following along at home, I really liked Ghosting the Ghetto, Call Off Duty, and Wallpaper. Those were my 3 favourites from this collection. I thought they were the strongest. Not every poem in this collection is super strong, but I thought generally speaking it was a pretty strong collection. He does really amazing word choices as a poet, which is what you want. You want a poet that's making good word choices. And I'm also looking forward to hearing more from Omar Sakr. Again, when we come to my book haul for this month, I have managed to find a secondhand copy of his debut novel, Son of Sin. So look out for that. But yeah, I liked this author enough to seek out more of his work. Overall, I gave this collection 3.5 stars, but I'm looking forward to reading more from this author. Okay, the next one is a little bit fluffier. It's a romance book that I picked up, and this one I got from Amplify Bookstore. And this is the first one of my Amplify Bookstore. I have a subscription to them, and this was one of the books that came in my subscription, The Matchmaker by Saman Shad. This is all about a woman called Sima, who is a professional matchmaker for the Desi community in Sydney. Cal is an eligible bachelor whose parents hire Sima to secretly convince him to date Desi women because he's been dating white women. But is Cal Sima's perfect match? It's a bit of a professional nightmare, to be honest. But yeah, this was fun. It wasn't super, deep, or didn't have anything particularly deep to say, although it did really explore kind of the nuances of the Desi community in Sydney, at least, where you have a community of people with a similar background who are living in a different place to with their ancestral homeland. And I think, yeah, it was a fun book. I listened to this one on audiobook as well. I listened to it on the way to a trip that I took recently. Yeah, it's cute. It's really cute. They're lovable characters. You hope that they get together in the end. I will say the aftermath of the crisis point in the book is not as strong as the build-up. So the build-up was a lot stronger than the aftermath, where things the pace picked up in a weird way. Yeah, there was also some very obviously sown seeds for future interactions. There was a pair of high heels that kind of get mentioned a couple of times, and yeah, it felt a bit cheesy, a bit cheesy to me. Also, this felt a little bit like a screenplay at times, which makes sense because the author of this book works in TV writing screenplays. So, yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, it doesn't always read as a novel in that way. The spice level is low, but the relationship is very believable. I liked it. But I have to say, I read Emily Henry's book Lovers a couple of months ago, and that is now my benchmark for romance books, so this didn't even come close. But it was good. It was good fun, it was cute, and I'd recommend if you're looking for something a bit left of centre in your romance books, but also low spice. So if that's your thing, then yeah, this would be a good choice for you. Okay, turning the page of my notes. On to the next one. The next book that I read is a non-fiction book, and it is The Voice to Parliament Handbook by Thomas Mayo and Kerry O'Brien, with cartoons by Kathy Wilcox. The call number, for this one is 323.119915. We in Australia have a vote coming up to make a decision about whether we're going to change our constitution. A vote of the people is required. I learnt from this book. So to change the constitution, we have to have a referendum. We have had several referendums in the past and very few of them get up. So we're very hopeful about this one. I'm definitely voting yes, and I was before I read this book, but this really helped to clarify my position on why I'm voting yes. So let me read to you from the blurb a little bit, just so that you know what this is about. The Voice to Parliament Handbook is a clear and simple guide for the millions of Australians who would like to support the Uluru Statement from the Heart, but want to understand what a voice to Parliament and constitutional recognition actually mean. Indigenous leader Thomas Mayo and acclaimed journalist Kerry O'Brien answer the most commonly asked questions about why the voice should be enshrined in the Constitution. They also reflect on this historic opportunity for genuine reconciliation to help make us whole as a nation. So, the work of reconciliation is definitely the work of all post-colonial, I guess you could call it, nations, where, another country has come in and has taken over from the people who are already on the land, who have been here for generations. You know, so that is definitely the work of our nation to continue healing from the destruction that that caused. And that is still happening today. So this is an important step. And this was a helpful guide just to sort of understand the background to it, how we came to this, how this action is supported by 80% or more of Aboriginal people at the latest polls. So it is definitely something that for those of us who are not Aboriginal people to consider when we're making our decision in this referendum. So would recommend just to kind of give a good overview of that and to help you sort of understand and talk to other people about it. When, you know, if you're asked to justify why you're voting yes, for example. Yeah, so it's a useful explanation of the how and the why of the referendum. There's some good myth busting in here. They answer some really common questions. One reason, so I ended up giving this 4 stars. I wasn't going to rate it at all, but then there was one chapter in there that was written, it wasn't written by either of the 2 authors of the book. It was written by guest authors, Professor Fiona Stanley and Professor Marsha Langton. I've not heard of Fiona Stanley before, but I have heard of Marsha Langton. They were talking about some positive programs that have come from the community, and that's why they work. They were talking about youth justice, which is a huge issue here in Australia, where Aboriginal youth are, and people in general, but youth in particular, are overrepresented in our criminal justice system. And they were talking about a program that works. However, when they were talking about the issue, they said all the children and youth in detention have had a harmful developmental pathway. But one of the examples that they gave of that, so some of them I thought were relevant, like fetal alcohol syndrome, early life trauma, those are definitely examples of harmful developmental pathways. But they also included ADHD. And that's a bit of a sticking point for me because I disagree that that's a harmful developmental pathway. ADHD is a neurotype. And then also they described these children as damaged children, which I think is language that I found offensive because I don't think, in particular, I'm thinking about ADHD, but it also applies to some of these other categories as well. That they're damaged children. I think that's really unhelpful language. So I took a point off for that because, yeah, I didn't think that was helpful. But it didn't come from the main authors. It was this sort of guest chapter that these 2 other authors were writing. So, yeah, that was the only thing that I took issue with. Otherwise, this was helpful. A little bit repetitive, but I guess in terms of it being simple for people to use, that's great. All right, the last book that I read was a fantasy novel by Garth, the Left-Handed Booksellers of London. This was really fun. We've got 18-year-old Susan. She's just turned 18 and she's looking for her father. Merlin is a left-handed bookseller, part of a mysterious secret group who police the old world whenever it intrudes on the new world, and their paths cross. Adventure ensues. This was a really fun romp and an interesting world that was built based on mythology and tradition, which I really like in a fantasy book. That's the kind of thing that I like to see. It was set in the 80s, and that sort of felt a little bit arbitrary and not necessary to the story in many ways. It was sort of vaguely referred to a couple of times, but that was it. So it really could have been set at any time. Also, the romance between Susan and Merlin didn't feel believable to me. It could just as easily have been a friendship and worked that way. There were some really unsubtle inserts about weapons as well, like just went on about like specifically describing a weapon and cars, and a couple of TV show references that felt a little bit weird to me and a bit unnecessary. So I ended up giving it 3.25 stars, but I did really enjoy it. I am going to read the sequel, and I would be happy to read more from Garth next. But yeah, there were just a few things that made this a not quite perfect book for me, but I did really enjoy it. So I'm conscious of the fact that my battery's not my battery, I'm about to run out of room on my camera because I forgot to delete some stuff before I started filming. So let's wrap this up right now. These were the books that I read in September. I had a really good reading month getting through all of these Australian books, and had a particularly good time with a couple of them. But yeah, very positive about all of them, really. So those are my books. I hope you enjoyed this wrap up, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.